Hello, my lovely natsukis. It's your bestie Summer. So this as you can see from the title of this video, it's gonna have a few more parts than I thought it would, because this is only 2 chapters. And we're still in the first one. Let's go, baby. What's wrong with me? But anyways, so fun fact, but hey, wait, before the fun fact, technically, the longer it is, the better it is, because that gives me time to find fics, and that gives you time to enjoy the fics, and it's not just a 2-shot or a 4-shot, so, I hope you have fun with that. But also, I went to a weird occult store type place yesterday, and they had so many weird things. It was actually so cool. Like, I got this book keychain that actually works. It's so fun. I have to hide it from my parents, though, sadly, because they're not into witchy stuff. But, like, who cares? Because I am. And I'm allowed to make that decision. God, I can't wait to move out. But anyways, any warnings will be in the description as always. And without further ado, Death Lingering, a salvis podfic written by Canis Rising and read by Summer Audio. Enjoy. Larry led the group into the forest where Sal had disappeared, all armed with flashlights. The warm summer air didn't stop the chill he felt crawling up his back, growing in his stomach. Darkness creeping at the edge of his mind as they ran, splitting up briefly before joining together again. No matter how fast he ran, he couldn't escape the fear that this was all his fault. Henry was distraught, calling out for his son in every direction, pulling out every nickname he's ever used in the hopes that he can catch Sal's attention. He kept running his fingers through what was left of his hair, sometimes briefly pulling it to ground himself. His blood pressure was high enough as it was, and now he has to deal with Larry's mistakes because he couldn't keep Sal's from bolting. Lisa was carrying the group's first aid kit and much more calmly helped Henry call out for Sal. She had a remarkable ability to stay calm in a bad situation, especially when it was Larry's fault. She had always resolved never to blow up at Larry, but somehow he felt that would be easier to take than the steely calm she always came to. The silence of her disappointment and her observant eyes reading him like a book. It always felt as if she were carving his guts out with her mind. If killing a rabbit cursed him and ruined his life, he wondered what kind of curse he would get if Sal somehow died out here. Stop it, goddammit, Larry thought. Sal wasn't dead yet. He can't be doing that to himself. He told himself the fact over and over, but it didn't stop the growing pit in his stomach. This was avoidable. It was his fault, and he knew it. He was the one responsible for Sal, someone he thought as a big brother, and he failed, because all he ever does is fail the people closest to him. Of course, that's why his dad left, isn't it? Because he was such a disappointment. He wasn't cursed because he killed a rabbit. He was just a failure. How anyone thought he was worth keeping around, let alone Sal, was incomprehensible to him. As he stopped to catch his breath and look around the forest for a minute, he felt something warm touch his shoulder, and he jumped. It was just his mother. He looked up to her warm brown eyes. He was almost taller than her now, but height couldn't stop her from pulling him into her chest, planting a kiss in his hair. "We'll find him," she promised. She stayed observant as usual, always picking up on his stress no matter how much he tried to hide it. Larry leaned into her embrace. "This is my fault," he said. "This wouldn't have happened if I just—" "No, don't say that," his mother interrupted him. "This is not your fault. These things happen even if you think you have everything together. Trauma does a lot of things to people, and you can't predict all of it. What matters is that we find Sal and get him home safe, okay? He was quiet, nodded into her shoulder. Now let's keep going, okay? Okay. The two of them broke from the embrace and began to cover more ground by splitting up again. Larry kept going into the direction Sal entered the forest. Meanwhile, Henry and his mother went to the left and right. The pit in his stomach was satiated a little bit for now, but he didn't know how longer his mother's words could last him, especially if Sal got hurt. Larry had no idea how far they were into the forest when he heard Henry's voice calling out, saying something kind of unintelligible due to the distance. He found himself and Lisa running in his direction, and Larry finally started to recognize some of the trees around him. He realized they were actually somewhat close to the lake where the fireworks were being shot from. Henry had a blanket in hand. It was the same blanket Sal had come to the basement with, wrapped around his shoulders. "Blood," he said curtly. There's blood." There wasn't a lot, but it was enough to know that Sal was hurt. "Probably from when he cut his hand," Larry said. Henry and Lisa looked at him, and he suddenly felt a lot more nervous for some reason. A firework went off, and he tripped and scraped his hand. I was going to get first aid kit, but he bolted. Henry sighed in relief. "Thank God it's not serious," he said, running his hand through his hair again. Suddenly, the group's blood collectively ran cold when they heard a visceral scream coming from deeper into the forest, to the left of where they were. It wasn't incredibly loud from where they were standing, but it wasn't exactly quiet. The sound itself, however, would ring through their ears as they processed what they were listening to. It was definitely Sal. Nobody else, Larry knew, could scream like that. As the three began to run in the direction of the scream, Larry started to wonder why Sal would start running towards the fireworks instead of away from them. It's what's currently making him relive the worst thing he's ever experienced. Why would he want to go anywhere near it? He remembered a conversation that he and Sal had at one point when they were high in the treehouse and talking about some of the horrible shit they've gone through. "Sometimes I'll trigger myself on purpose," Sal said. "Why the hell would you do that?" Larry asked. He figured it would be some kind of generic self-destruction thing, but the answer Sal said gave him a lot to think about. "Because all of that, the memories, sometimes I want to feel it all again. I don't really know why, but I want it. I want to reach out and touch it, but it's so volatile." Sal looked down at his hand in his lap for a minute before he leaned back into his beanbag chair he was in. Larry still didn't quite understand. He didn't want to relive any of the shit he's been through. He wanted to forget about it. Sal was different, though. What he's gone through was different. "I want to be able to hold these memories, but it's like it's stuck behind a kind of floodgate. They can only stay completely open or completely shut. There's no in-between right now. If I touch any of it, it's so intense that I can't handle it." He swallowed thickly, cottonmouth getting him bad with the hole in his cheek and all. He took a sip of the water Larry gave him. "But I still want to feel it. I don't know. I guess I don't like having a part of myself locked up like that." Sal definitely didn't trigger himself on purpose this time, but maybe a part of him was trying to reach out and touch everything that was locked away. These two parts of him desperately wanting reconciliation, but they couldn't get there with these all-or-nothing floodgates. Still, even subconsciously, he sought that connection. "Hang on, Sally," Larry thought as he ran. Tears still poured down the left side of Sal's face as he stared into the sky. He was scared out of his mind, but he did it anyway. It was honestly very beautiful this evening. The summer sunset was full of wisps and clouds, the streaks of purple and greenish blue. They only got a piece of it from their clearing in the woods, but when the stars started coming in as the sun lowered into the horizon, framed by the tree branches, it was brilliant. Despite the terror Sal was experiencing, they both still managed to find a way to appreciate it, or at least it felt like that to Travis. Suddenly, something cold and kind of wet was touching Travis's hand, and he jolted a bit. He looked down and found Sal's smaller, clammy hand trying to grab his. Travis didn't have the heart to tell him to fuck off, that it was weird, not after everything that had happened in the past half hour, so he let him. With his heart racing and the terror of someone potentially finding them like this growing a knot in his throat, he let Sal hold his hand for comfort, squeezing tightly, and Travis squeezed back. Travis couldn't explain the feeling that had overtaken him during all of this. Maybe it was because Travis knew all too well the pale thing lingering in the dark. Maybe it's because he knew Sal had seen it too. Maybe it's because Travis looked through Sal's eyes, seeing into the tainted soul overwhelmed with the familiarity of the terror that stared back at him. Maybe he thought the blood smearing onto his palm could grant him salvation from his hell. Maybe the tight squeeze of Sal's palm and all the quiet forgiveness that Sal had given him could somehow erase all the sin from his body in a way that all his prayers couldn't. Sal's head bumped into Travis's shoulder and stayed there, his face tilted towards the ground as he still shook and sobbed. He wiped his face with the back of his sleeve, pushing the small, warm body against Travis's stiff side, blood smearing between their fingers. It felt a little fucked up. It made Travis a bit nervous, but it didn't feel bad. "It's okay, Sally face," Travis said, a lot less stilted and awkward this time. It sounded a lot more like he meant it. Travis noticed Sal becoming more antsy again before he noticed the sound of footsteps through the forest. "Sal!" a man yelled frantically. "Sal, where are you?" That must have been Sal's father. Travis didn't get the chance to respond before beams of light burned his retinas. He couldn't see who it was until the light was graciously removed from his face and subsequently shined on the forest floor. Travis blinked a few times to get his vision back and realized he was standing face to face with an incredibly shocked Larry Johnson. Travis didn't even have the energy to feel an emotion about this development. He just stared back at Larry, with Sal curled up at his side, without saying anything. "Henry?" Larry choked out. "I found him." "Larry?" Sal asked quietly. "Yeah, it's me. Man, you okay?" Larry asked, not sure whether he should get close or not. Sal only nodded weakly in response. Henry ran towards Larry, carrying some kind of thin blanket in his arms, held tightly. Soon, Lisa followed, carrying what looked like a first aid kit of some kind, an old dented metal box with the aid symbol on it. Two adults weren't nearly as shocked as Larry seemed. In fact, looked incredibly relieved to see that Sal was with someone at least slightly familiar. "Sally, come to me. Come here," Mr. Fisher said, and Sal seemed to stir more. Travis gently nudged Sal in the direction of his father, wanting to escape the situation as quickly as possible. As Sal started to get up with the most pathetic, infantile manner, he weakly called out, "Daddy?" a testament to the state of mind he was in. Sal crawled clumsily into his father's arms, into the blanket that he provided, and Travis couldn't fully explain the subsequent squeeze in his chest. Something ancient ached inside him, something he was scared to touch. He squeezed his bloody hand shut. "There's a scrape on his hand," Travis said, returning to that awkwardness he felt when he first found Sal. Lisa jumped into action, looking at the scrape on Sal's palm that was no longer bleeding, but was definitely very dirty. Sal kept mumbling some kind of incoherent garble into the crook of his father's neck, while his father stroked his hair, and Larry remained indecisive on whether he should look at Sal or Travis. Suddenly, Travis didn't know what to do anymore. Mr. Fisher looked up to Travis from over Sal's head, and with these painful, pleading eyes, and mouthed the words, "Thank you." Travis wasn't sure if Mr. Fisher knew who he was, if he would be thanking Travis the same way if he did. For the first time, Travis was wondering what Sal has told his father about him, and it made his stomach twist itself up. He could only give Mr. Fisher an awkward, curt nod in response, and he stood up to leave, not really knowing what else to do. Once Sal's hands bandaged up by Lisa, Mr. Fisher cradled Sal more closely, responding to his incoherent trauma babble with comforting words. Travis watched from his area under the tree while Mr. Fisher and Lisa comforted him. He froze, his ancient ache back into dormancy inside his steady heart. Maybe, if he reminded himself enough times that envy was a sin, he could finally stop feeling it. Larry shifted his weight and stepped on a twig that snapped underneath his stupid large foot. Travis's eyes slowly shifted over to the tall brunette and gave him an empty glare. Larry blinked and rubbed the back of his neck as his gaze shifted to the leaf beneath their feet. He cleared his throat. He began eloquently. "Thanks. You didn't have to do all that." "You better not tell anyone about this," Travis replied graciously. "I don't think anyone would believe me," he said genuinely, which makes sense. It's not like Travis had ever been particularly nice to Sal, even when Sal went out of his way to check up on him. Even when the conversations were going well, he wasn't particularly nice, always curt at best. At that point, the two of them noticed that Mr. Fisher was picking Sal up off the ground now that his hand was bandaged and he seemed to be calmer. Sal was partially swaddled in the throw blanket, his face buried in the crook of his neck, his right hand partially gripped onto his father's worn sweater half-consciously. His father, he continued to occasionally mumble and hiccup like a small child, but his father seemed to have no trouble understanding whatever was coming out of Sal's mouth. "I know," he said. "We can do that when we get back home, okay?" Mr. Fisher spoke with this softness in his voice that gave Travis a sense of déjà vu he couldn't explain. Larry broke the silence between the two of them, knowing he was going to have to leave soon. "If I don't tell anyone, how about you don't tell anyone either?" There was an unusual look on Larry's face, a sense of pain in his eyes that was covered up by his steeled exterior. Travis got the feeling that this wasn't over somehow. This clearly wasn't the first time the group had experienced this. Travis shoved a hand into his pocket, scoffing and looking off to the side, trying to act as cool as he could in the face of all this. "I don't think anyone would believe me," he replied curtly. Larry gave somewhat of a smirk, similarly refusing to look at Travis. "Right, of course not," he replied. Despite their hatred for each other, the two of them still managed to sit calmly and in a feeling of mutual confusion and embarrassment, communicating quietly to ensure that it would be difficult for anyone to get any information on what happened here. Because it's not like Sal's scream was localized only to the forest. Surely people who were observing the fireworks at the lake would have noticed. But they'll never find out what it was if they don't hear anything about it. "Okay, I think it's time to get him home," Mr. Fisher said to Lisa rather quietly. He looked to Travis once again, pausing. "I owe you one, kid. A big one. If you ever need anything, well, I don't have a lot, but if you ever need an adult man with no marketable skills, or if you need to look through an extensive collection of MS-DOS games, apartment 402 at Addison's." He offered an awkward grin. Travis couldn't imagine he's been in a situation like this before, so it made sense that they didn't change the fact that he didn't really know how to respond to this offer. He had no use for it, having no home computer. His dad thought that computers were some kind of fad that would just never justify how expensive they got, just to do things he's been doing with his hands reliably for decades. But whatever. He needed the situation to be over. Gotcha, he replied, satisfying Mr. Fisher. He turned and began walking off, pausing to adjust his grip on Sal before continuing. Lisa shortly followed suit. Neither Larry nor Travis really knew what to do with any of this situation, and Travis figured that after it was all over, for Travis at least, that they'd brush it under the rug and pretend it never happened. So, as Larry left with Lisa and Mr. Fisher to enjoy whatever else they were trying to do that night, Travis left the area himself, walking back into his father's empty beige house. His socks made contact with the tassels, shag carpet his father loved, and it was now he fully realized that he'd spent that entire hour without shoes, and his feet hurt a bit from walking around in just his socks, which were now damp and very dirty. He really thought he was going to go outside and find some kind of animal. Not that. He stood outside the bathroom door, and he looked at his bloody palm, shades of wet red drying into his rusty brown, smeared all over, mixing with memories of Sal's smaller body curled up next to his. He was so warm. Travis hated the way the sick ache yearned in his chest, was satiated by it. He hated that the universe, that God, wanted to show him this part of Sal, dangling everything he's ever wanted in front of him on a rope, just to pull it away from him and remind him how far out of reach it all truly was. He couldn't help but wonder if God was taunting or teasing him, or if he simply disagreed with Kenneth Phelps on a few things. He walked into the bathroom and stared into his own reflection, a bit dirty from his time outside. He looked away and turned on the sink. He could pray about it, but he knew God wouldn't answer him anymore. He wasn't sure he ever really did anyway. When they got back, the priority was on cleaning Sal up and grounding him a bit more. Thanks to Travis, though, that task was a lot easier than it had been in the past when Sal had episodes like this, and he became his lucid, exhausted self pretty quickly. He was still quite jumpy and easily frightened, but that wasn't unexpected. The next thing was to keep Sal's nerves calm as he and Larry smoked in the basement, with the window open. Maybe it would have been better to try this from the start, but Larry didn't like smoking in the apartment because his mom hated it, and the possibility that it could slip through the walls of this ancient shithole and possibly piss off Addison made him paranoid. That didn't matter very much right now, though. Sal was more important. When the two of them were properly baked, Sal's nerves had melted away like ice on a hot stove. It was surprising. Larry took him for the type to get paranoid when getting stoned, and it took a lot of preparation to figure out how to talk him down from the spiral the very first time they got high together. But that didn't seem to be the case at all. He wasn't exactly in the best frame of mind, but he was so much better, so much more relaxed and comfortable existing this way. It was a huge weight off of Larry's shoulders to be able to see Sal laughing like this again. The four of them had cramped together onto Lisa's tiny old couch in front of her TV and playing whatever rom-com movie that Larry had picked out, something calm, something low risk. While three of them were on the couch, Sal kind of sat on his father's lap and kind of sat on Larry's lap. It changed from moment to moment, but Lisa's couch wasn't big enough for 4 people, so they just had to make do. Sometimes it felt like Lisa and Larry were the only 2 people he could trust in this world. Oh, and maybe that blonde kid that was comforting Sal. Henry had seen him around before, probably. What was his name? Troy? Trevor? Trevor sounds kind of right. So those were the 3 people he could trust in this world right now. The 4 of them, cooped up in the couch like this, laughing at the TV and the new inventive ways that his stoned son found to sit in the 3 of them. It felt so natural, almost as if they were some kind of family together. Maybe that was just wishful thinking on his part, but after Diane died, and he'd abandoned himself in favor of the bottle. It felt amazing to realize that he'd finally managed to once again find folks he could call his people. Henry knew that tomorrow wouldn't be easy, but that didn't mean the rest of tonight couldn't be. At the end of the third movie, Lisa had pulled out for the night. It was definitely getting late now, and she was a working woman after all. Checking the time, Henry realized that he too was a working man and decided it was probably a good idea to get Sal and himself home now. Sal was laying his head on Larry's lap for the latter half of the movie, and there he remained afterwards. That's when Henry realized that he'd fallen asleep at some point, so had Larry. He laughed to himself before gently shifting Sal back onto his lap to pick him up. It wasn't too difficult. Sal could be a heavy sleeper, especially when he was stoned. Another benefit to the devil's lettuce, as sometimes it seemed like Sal couldn't get enough sleep at night, and he couldn't take sleeping pills anymore to assist with that. Henry began to get up with Sal in his arms, making sure to not disturb his sleep too much. He only stirred a little bit. Lisa got up, putting her own throw blanket onto Larry's sleeping body for the night. She got a rather melancholy look towards Sal as he shifted in Henry's arms. It wasn't quite a look of pity. She knew a lot better than by now, having known Sal for so long. Mostly, she was hoping that Sal would be able to get some rest after everything he'd gone through today, and that it would actually be restful for him this time. But you couldn't always be sure that it would happen. Yeah, Henry said, responding to something unspoken. He's probably going to be pretty upset when he wakes up. He never handles situations like these very well. I'm just glad that preacher's kid didn't call the cops or something. He chuckled. He sure looks like he didn't know what he was doing, though. I just hope he won't be too hard on himself about it. It's not his fault. She rubbed the back of her neck in a worried habit. Yeah, that part he seemed to struggle with, Henry replied. There was a long silence as the two of them watched Sal and Larry sleep before Henry decided to break it. But tomorrow's another day, and all that, right? He tried for an awkward semi-smile, and Lisa returned it. Tomorrow is another day, she repeated, sounding a bit more hopeful than he did. They said their goodbyes, and Henry made his way to the cold elevator and back to apartment 402. Unlike other families with well-adjusted parents, Henry's relationship didn't grow stronger after Diane died. It frayed quite heavily, and he knew it was his fault. Sal needed him, but he abandoned his boy for the eternal numbness of his poison, because he'd rather drink himself to sleep every night than have to confront head-on that woman he loved and had spent so many years with. The woman he ditched his parents for, the woman he cared for, was now dead. He knew it logically, but he didn't want to know it. He didn't want it to be happening at all, so he did everything in his power to make sure it didn't feel like it was happening by choosing not to feel anything at all, because he was passed out drunk in front of the TV in his LAZ boy. He didn't pay very much attention to Sal, not really. Not when Sal had Gizmo, the new kitten, and his therapist. Not when he spent as much time as possible not being awake. He didn't really cook or clean. If anything got done, it was mostly because Sal did it. He did his best to cook for the both of them, to clean up the beer cans in the living room, the vomit off the corners of his mouth, all while still managing to do his classwork and while getting bullied pretty bad in school at the time. It was a dark period. It wasn't until he lost his job, got a DUI, and then nearly lost Sal for a second time that he realized the state that his life was in. This wouldn't have hit him so hard if he could have just managed to find it in himself to stay present. He sighed. That was all in the past now. He couldn't do it then, but he did it a couple of years ago, and now he does it every day. It's not quite as easy as breathing, and he didn't exactly quit drinking entirely, but what he is doing now is choosing his son over it, because he didn't sign up to be like his own father. He was better than that. Something Diane had always believed about him, so hard that now that she was gone, he had to believe it too. Henry had laid Sal down on his bed, made sure that he was as covered by the throw blanket as he could be. He gently unbuckled his prosthetic the rest of the way and set it on his dresser. He saw little tracks in the side of Sal's face where the mask had pressed into his skin as he fell asleep on Larry's lap previously. His face was so peaceful and calm now, despite the faintly extant tear marks on his face, and his eyes slightly swelling from the tears. Henry leaned over to gently press a kiss to Sal's ear. Whatever awaited them tomorrow was at least a handful of hours away. The eye of the storm would pass, and Sal would probably be thrown into some kind of spiral that wouldn't end until August was over. Shit, Henry thought. He just realized how close it was to the anniversary of it all. It was just a little over a month away now. Surely that couldn't have been helping Sal's mental state through all of this. He sighed as he attempted to not trip over all of the stuff on Sal's floor right now. From tearing his room apart, having this breakdown so close to August was probably going to make this harder than he thought. He really needed to make sure that he could step up this year and take care of Sal like he did today. He couldn't be taking any risks. "Good night, Sal," Henry said to Sal's sleeping bedroom, shutting the door behind him carefully. "That was a problem for tomorrow, Henry." And that was part 3, chapter 1 of Death Lingering, a Sally Face podfic written by Canis Rising and read by Summer Audio. Okay, so this chapter was much longer than I thought it would be, mainly because I was gonna cut this one into another 2 parts, but then I realized that would be too short, so you're gonna have just a long chapter today. But yeah, so we're finally gonna be starting on chapter 2. Woo! It's just like the aftermath and stuff, just like a bunch of different things. You'll see. This is where a lot of the tags come into, so it'll be fun. This is gonna be traumatic. Ooh, not a lot, but still a little. But anyways, I hope you all enjoyed and have a wonderful day. Bye bye.